Good evening, this is Mutongwe TV and this is our live broadcast at 7 p.m. Today being on 3rd of March 2023, I am your host, John Dennis Mwendwa.
I am Emily Mashipe. Our language translator tonight is Alice Glory, but before then, let's have our headlines.
Good news to Kenyans as the government plans to import 4 million bags of maize to Kenya.
LGBTQ crisis still thrives as both the president and opposition leader says it's unacceptable.
Parents keep junior secondary school learners at home as learning in public schools still continues to stall.
And Rwanda holds a 2-day national conference interrogation with their leaders led by Paul Kagame.
Thank you and welcome again, whereby MP urged Kenyans to ignore Supreme Court decision on LGBTQ judgment, where the uproar rose over the Supreme Court judgment, where the members of the National Assembly now want the Supreme Court to sanction for what they say is attempting to legislate from the bench.
They issued judgment on LGBTQ to please the Western nation, the leaders calling on the bench to review the session, saying that the judgment went against cultural norms and risks tend to affect the future generation. Let's get the report from our very own Lucia Shikoko.
Kenya Meteorological Department projects 6 straight failed rain season, whereby getting more on weather news, the department have given an analysis on a small fraction of the country will receive no more rains, with the rest registering depressed and highly depressed rainfall that is set to start in 2 weeks' time.
A group of leaders allied to the Kenya Kwanza Alliance have joined hands in condemning the Supreme Court for upholding the right of registration for the LGBTQ community. They said Parliament will not support the ruling.
With the religious organizations, the churches and everybody, and we are going to request the Supreme Court in their full bench of 7 in number to review that position.
We have agreed that if the NGO Council will try to register any institution that is promoting this vice in Kenya, I will move a bill in Parliament that we get it disbanded.
We shall go whichever heights possible, including further constitutional amendment in Parliament at all referendum if necessary.
We will call out those judges who specifically voted that they are not for the interest of the people or humanity for that matter.
The MPs say the court directive does not only lead to the blatant violation of the law but also amounts to a gross disregard and disrespect for African culture and norms. Led by the
probably might look at it the way the Supreme Court in the US is structured, so that we find a balance between alarmists, between members who simply want to destroy the society, and those of us who values the culture of the people of Kenya.
We must never allow our country to take up alien ideas, alien cultures.
On its lowest ebb in history. I think the president of this country should write immediately to the Attorney General to appeal this ruling. It cannot be bearable.
Whatever the decision they made in that particular judgment, it was done in vain. Because Article 11 is very clear. No same-sex marriage is allowed in this country. No same-sex relationship is allowed in this country.
Needs of the citizen, and majority of Kenyans are those that will not condone the legalizing of any activities undertaken by the LGBTQ community. Reporting from Nakuru County, I'm Lucia Shiku.
Kenya Meteorological Department projects 6 straight failed rain season, whereby getting more on weather news, the department have given an analysis on a small fraction of the country will receive no more rains, with the rest registering depressed and highly depressed rainfall that is set to start in 2 weeks' time.
Now other countries are among the areas with depressed rains. The main department says it will be sufficient to allow the farmers to plant fast maturing crops. Rachel Mwangi gives us more details.
For a country already reeling under high food prices, the report from the Meteorological Department paints a picture of even harder times ahead. The March to May weather forecast shows that the country's and the region's rain outlook is less than desirable.
Going by the analysis that we have done, does not promise a lot of rainfall. Number one, there may be some delay. And number two, there may be gaps. Once we get the onset, there may be gaps where you have long periods of no rainfall, even though the onset will have already been
focused. Only 3 areas, parts of Marsabit, Kajiado, and the eastern parts of Narok, will register normal rainfall for this period. The regions in the country's breadbasket, including Trans Nzoia, Uasin Gishu, Elgeyo Marakwet, West Pokot, the larger parts of western Kenya counties, Kericho, parts of Narok and West Turkana, will receive depressed rains, while the rest of the counties, including Nairobi, counties in Central and Mount Kenya regions, northern eastern counties, and the coastal strip will receive what the Met Department terms as highly depressed rains that will last until June.
Even in terms
it is expected that farmers will have low crop and pasture performances that will result in low yields for farmers. The spillover effect of this will be low access to foods that will cost more, further worsening the food insecurity in these regions and the country. The reduced rains will also pose a risk to the survival of livestock in a sector that has already suffered losses, running into over 2 million.
Currently, 4.4 million Kenyans are in dire need of food, a number that's likely to rise in the coming months. In order to manage climate risks, decision makers must understand the risks well and be able to anticipate them.
But in places where the rains will be normal, the Met Department warns that there could be cases of flash flooding and increased waterborne diseases incidents. At the same time, the impact of the pains will be felt in the energy sector with decreased hydropower generation at the Seven Forks Dam. The National Disaster Management Authority has been challenged to be on the ready for any eventualities based on the weather data.
For other users of this information.
Thank you, Rachel Mwangi. And thousands of students who sat for their KCSE exams attained a university intake cutoff grade of C+, face an uncertain future hope following the university funding, whereby the analysis shows that over 70,000 students risk missing university funding over the financing of their higher education.
The fund has recommended that the government funding cease being mandatory but should not be dependent on merits, level of need, national priorities, and affirmative actions in approved. Then the session of students who score the highest grade will no longer be guaranteed funding, and a radical shift from higher education funding in Kenya. Our very own Margaret Wangai gives more details.
Ian Omodi is one of the students waiting to be placed in the public universities. He attained a mean grade of C+ in the 2022 KCSE. He survived on bursaries given by the county government of Kisumu. Ian comes from a family that is battling poverty. The path out of this poverty lies with Ian advancing his education, which is dependent on the government sponsorship. This path might become narrower as the government funding may be taken away in the university education. Ian's predicaments faces thousands of students in the country, as others are not sure of where they will be once the university placement is out. Many of which have managed the education through sponsorships and are now looking up to.
Kwa sababu sasa mimi sijui nitaenda wapi. Nikikosa kutimiza ndoto yangu, nitakuwa tu hivyo mtu wa kawaida. na nitakuwa tu bado tu nafanya vibarua.
Kelvin's predicament faces thousands of students across the country. Leah and others are also unsure of where they will be once the university placement list is out. They too have made it this far through sponsorship from benefactors. They were now looking up to the government to take them over the threshold through sponsorship.
Chuo kikuu tufanye kosa ambayo tunataka, then mwisho tukuje tuwasaidie wazazi wetu, na najua serikali kitusikia itatusaidia.
Hapo ndo nimesikia kwamba serikali wale wa Cyprus haiwezi kawa support, na hapa sasa itatuaffect sisi wenye tuko nayo. Sawa kama wale tulishindwa kwenda polytechnic na ile Zipre na sai Cyprus, sasa tafanyaje?
Their dreams hanging in
this path might become narrower as the government funding may be taken away in the university education. Ian's predicaments faces thousands of students in the country, as others are not sure of where they will be once the university placement is out. Many of which have managed their education through sponsorships and are now looking up to the government to sponsor their education. Their dreams might die as the government admits to not going
if you come from Bungoma and you are very poor, using the criteria HELB uses, then we will take and fund only 81,000 students and leave out 91,000 students.
Compared to last year's, which was 122,831. There is fear that students like Ian Omondi will be locked out from accessing the funds to sponsor their university education. Daily Bright, Mtongoi TV, Kisumu.
All right, now parents keep their learners at home as learning in public schools stall, and the transition to junior secondary school learning across public schools is seemingly stalling once again as the schools await for the government to release 9.6 billion shillings promised.
Some schools are still to receive all the needed textbooks as they also grumble ill-trained and inadequate teachers to instruct the hundreds of thousands of children in junior secondary school. Elder Kerubo reports on the debits of the crisis that has made some parents keep their children at home instead of seeing these waste days without learning in school.
Jack, not his real name, should be in class right now going through the syllabus of the first term of junior secondary school education. His father says he would rather his son stays at home being more helpful and productive than what he says is wasting time in a class with inadequate teachers.
Hawajaisoma tangu wafungue shule. Wanaenda huko tu wananiambia wanaenda huko story, sijui za sungura nini. Wengine napatana na hao huko wakitema wamevua ma uniform wameweka kwa bag. Uliza nini mbaya? Tumeenda wanaenda kuinda. Naona sasa mtoto atapotea tu hapo.
For the 10 schools have been in session for junior secondary, these students of Sinendet Primary and JSS in Nakuru have only revised 4 subjects and filled only 2 pages.
Asubuhi unatayarisha mtoto anaenda shule. Akienda shule akirudi nyumbani unamuuliza vitabu amesoma nini. Anasema sisi hatujawahi soma. Sisi tumeshida tu tukicheza hadi lunch kafika tukakula chakula, tena tukarudi kwa madarasa tunasoma. Saa 10 ikifika tena tunatoka. Hatuna mwalimu yoyote mwenye anaingia kwa darasa.
And as midterm break fast approaches, parents like these ones from Nakuru are worried at the amount of time already lost for the children. The roadblock in the learning include lack of adequate and sufficiently trained teachers deployed to schools.
Walimu wawili, mmoja anachukua hisabati, mwingine anachukua historia na somo la dini. Lakini ukiangalia CBC, ukiangalia kwa junior secondary, kwa sasa hatuna history, hatuna physics. Sasa unakuta kwamba kuna mkanganyo pale.
While other public schools are forging ahead,
the government pledge to disburse 9.6 Kenya shillings to schools countrywide hasn't been actualized. Education officials says the delay has not been intentional. The director also states to assure parents that their children's JSS funds will be in school bank account by the beginning of next week to facilitate better learning in public junior secondary schools across the country.
Right now, the Anti-Counterfeit Authority releases gold worth 50 million shillings, and this was seized at China Square Mall after the complainant withdrew the case launched against the outlets.
This comes as members of parliament called on the government to stop and warrant its vision, as it will deter detectors from setting up shopping in the country. Let's get more reports from our very own Phoebe Naishoro.
The Anti-Counterfeit Authority has closed the probe into the China Square saga after it had issued a statement indicating that the complaint against them has been withdrawn and goods worth 50 million Kenya shillings returned to the owner of the shopping complex. In a letter seen by Mutongoi TV, the complainant, Smith Moses, says that they have resolved the matter with the China Square after the manufacturer of the contested goods stepped in to confirm that they have supplied the goods to both traders. The scam, as legislators from both the National Assembly and the Senate call on the government to protect both local and foreign investors.
Kukuwe na structured engagement. Hatufurahi tukiona hii wale wengine wanasema wawekezaji wasikuje, wengine wanasema wengine wafanye namna hii. Sisi kama viongozi na wabunge kutoka bunge la Seneti na kitaifa tunasema it is not good for Kenya, because Kenya ikuwe na ile competitive kwa ile biashara ya dunia. To allow that competitiveness in the country, we must allow investors to do their part, local business people to do their part, and also the customers to be protected from exploitation.
The Anti-Counterfeit Authority Executive Director Dr. Robin Mbugwa says that the agency will ensure goods coming to the country are safe for consumption and protect legitimate business in the country.
One is on health and safety. You can imagine when you have got some counterfeited good getting into the shelves in the pharmaceuticals and chemists, that one is going to have a lot of impact on our people.
Protest outside Deputy President's office, citing invasion of Chinese businessmen in the country, which they claim has harmed their business. Reporting from Kajiado County, Phoebe Nation.
Homosexuality is unacceptable. The President William Ruto and the opposition leader Raila Odinga addressed upon the Supreme Court ruling. The two separately addressed the Supreme Court sanction that approved the registration of lesbianism, gayism, bisexual, transgender and queer, also known as LGBTQ groupings in the country.
The head of the state says he respects the Supreme Ruling Court verdict, but says homosexuality remains unacceptable. The Azimio leader as well accused the court of assuming the legislation role while ruling on the LGBTQ right on the association. Mary Kagwe kicks off the soft nights.
A case in the Supreme Court ruling on LGBTQ rights of associations, the head of state said Kenya will not accept homosexuality unions. Talking during the relaunch of the Women Enterprise yesterday at the Kenyatta International Convention Center in Nairobi, President William Ruto said he respects the Apex Court decisions but insisted that Kenya's values and religions do not allow the same-sex relationship. The president emphasizes that the cultural traditions of Kenya will prevail over any ruling or judgment by the court of the land. The head of state calls upon the traditions of Kenya will prevail over any ruling or judgment by the court of the land. The head of state calls upon the religious leaders to make a firm stand against LGBTQ agenda in the country. Azimio la Umoja leader Raila Odinga accuses the Supreme Court of assuming a legislative ground when it makes a decision on LGBTQ, ruling on rights of association on a meeting with the members of the Council of Imams and Preachers of Kenya in Nairobi. Reporting from Nairobi County, my name is Mary Kagwe.
Tutatue shida zetu tukiendelea.
Tuko na desturi
tunaheshimu katiba yetu, tunaheshimu madini zetu zote. Hatuwezi kwenda barabara ati ya wanawake kuoa wanawake wenzao, ati na wanaume kuoa wanaume wenzao.
Sasa mama akioa mama mwingine wataambiana nini? Mama mtaambiana nini? Hiyo maneno hatutaki. Hiyo ni mambo ya kishetani.
Thank you, Mary Kagwe, for the impressive report. Now, we are taking a short break and we will be back to you with good news that the government plans to import relief food to the Kenyans this month.
Nothing beats the freedom of overcoming the limitations of distance, time, and space. At Mount Kenya University, we offer internationally recognized education through the open, distance, and electronic learning, giving you the flexibility of studying from any part of the world and graduating on time. Simple? Great. Intake is in progress. Mount Kenya University, unlocking infinite possibilities.
Thank you and welcome again to our news and good news to Kenyans as government plans to import 4 million bags of maize this month as drought situation in the country worsens. President William Ruto says his government will import these bags this March to bridge the floods, the food shortage cap in the country.
The head of state says that the move will also go a long way in trying to feed families facing starvation in arid and semi-arid areas following the prolonged drought situation in the country. Our very own Dante has more details.
With the prices of basic commodity hitting the roof, President William Ruto says his government has laid down mechanism to caution Kenyans against increasing the cost of living. President Ruto says the government has approved the importation of 4 million bags of maize.
Ambao bado wako na chakula katika stores zao, tuliwapatia muda ya kuuza hiyo chakula. Sasa hiyo muda imeisha. Tumeamua katika baraza la mawaziri juzi ya kwamba sasa tumeweka mpango ya kuagiza chakula kutoka nje. Sasa tumekubali ya kwamba tutaagiza mahindi gunia milioni 4 ambayo itafika hapa kuanzia mwezi huu wa 3 tukienda mbele.
The head of state said that the importation window will also accommodate other food products. With over 5 million Kenyans facing starvation.
Tumeagiza mchele, tumeagiza vyakula vingine na hata mafuta ya kupikia. Tumeagiza pamoja na hata maragwe na mambo mengine ambayo itatusaidia kutuletea chakula, ndio tupunguze, ndio mambo ya chakula isipande juu.
Due to the ongoing drought and the weatherman predicting a green raining season that could last up to October, President Ruto says his government will start to distribute relief food to the affected families. The president added that the cabinet has approved
wako katika sehemu kame. Tumepanga na tumeweka shilingi bilioni 3 katika budget yetu ya juzi na tumesema hiyo chakula itaanza kusambazwa kuanzia wiki hii.
Additional expenditures to boost the school feeding program to ensure that current drought doesn't affect learners. President Ruto also took
an additional 1 billion shillings from this week for the school feeding program so that no child stayed out of school because they do not have food.
President Ruto also took a jibe at opposition leaders over their threats to hold demonstration over the cost of living.
Napanga mambo ya mbolea na wakulima, napanga importation ya chakula ndio tupunguze gharama ya chakula. Sasa mimi nitapata nafasi wapi ya kwenda kupambana na mambo ya masafa?
Right now, crossing the borders, Rwanda holds a 2-day national conference to interrogate leaders and government performances. Reflection to Kenya. Once the Kenyans promulgated the 2010 constitution, they anchored the public participation in the law as a structured way of consulting with the persons, groups, and even entities before the national outcome decisions are made, though at the counties, little activities happen and practice is less practiced at the national level.
However, across the borders in Rwanda, where the public participation model is anchored at a 2-day national conference where the citizen holds their leaders and government to give an account of their states. Rose Taylor of Mutongoi TV attended the day one of the conference on Monday, where the host, President Paul Kagame, took time with the state officers and neglected their civic duty to discuss the personal interest.
The streets of Kigali was a beehive of activities on Monday morning. All roads leading to Kigali Conventional Center for a unique public participation and accountability event, Omushyikirano Council. Omushyikirano is a national dialogue council chaired by the president, where citizens ask their leaders hard questions for accountability purposes. President Paul Kagame's entry into the auditorium signaled the start of an event. This event had been postponed twice because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The president took almost 30 minutes censuring government officials not providing services to citizens. Since 2003, Omushyikirano has birthed national building initiatives such as Abunzi, a committee which is handling disputes, Jinka, also known as One Cow Per.
Tell me the kind of business you're doing, if not what you were hired for.
Officials not providing
have very healthy leaders who have malnourished children in the country. Is that one of your goals?
A committee which is handling disputes, Jinka, also known as One Cow Per Family program, or Mwalimu Sacco, a corporate sacco for teachers. Even as
and you'll be fed by others, you will be held by the hand by others, and then you accept that?
Attendees included ambassadors, religious leaders, civil servants, and Rwandese from all walks of life.
We need to look at where we are now, even with the impact of COVID, everything. So where are we at?
Looking forward to improve my capacity of thinking about my country, about improving my work in terms of
4 months at this National Dialogue Council. Nevertheless, a lot of citizens, they'll also be keen to see what will happen tomorrow, where state officers and ministers end performance contracts and others will be awarded in that ceremony. Tilly Bright, Mutongoi TV, Rwanda.
All right, this brings us to the end of our 7 p.m. news tonight.
Thank you for your keenly follow-up on our news and for choosing your TV station broadcast #1, Mutongoi TV. Have been your host, Emily Mashipe.
And I am John Dennis Mwendoa. See you soon.